Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and in this video I'll be doing a review of Altar Quest by Adam and Brady Sadler, published by Blacklist Games, which is a cooperative fantasy adventure game for 1 to 4 players, which, depending on the number of players, can play anywhere between an hour and a half and up to 3 hours, perhaps even more, depending also on the scenario you play and if you're playing in the campaign mode or not. So let's take a look at the rules and then I'll give you my final thoughts. To set up a game of Altar Quest, you simply put the board on the table. It's a pretty big board, so you need a lot of space, and you also need to reserve some room around the board to put cards and some room to make your own card hero area. So you take one of the heroes decks, in this case I picked Myrene Duval, take all of their cards and you set aside their hero card, which is the card that has their name on it, their defense, their health, and these attribute icons here. And you also set aside her gear, her equipment here, which is in this case her blade and her spiked shield. And you can recognize those with the belt basically here underneath, and it also says equipment. So these 3 cards you keep in front of you, and then you take the deck. Then you separate these cards with the golden band. These have a silver band here. So the golden ones are only used in the campaign mode. So if you're playing a one-off, just take these out, put them back in the box. You won't be needing them. And all the other cards are shuffled, and you just put those next to your cards in your player area. Take a hero turn card, which is double-sided. One side has all of your actions that you can take, and the other side has the threat turn, villain turn, and quest turn, which is what happens after all the heroes have taken their turn. And then reserve, like I said, a space for those threat cards. And every hero also gets 3 action markers that you can flip around, indicating that you've used one of your 3 actions during your turn. And then every hero draws 4 cards from their hero deck and they're ready to go. Next, you collectively choose a quest to play. So you have this quest deck. In this case, this is the Search, which is the recommended starting quest if you're playing this game for the first time. There are several quests in the game, and one of these cards is the quest setup card, which has the setup on one side and the rules on the other side. So you set that card apart along with the quest tokens. And then you take the altar cards. There are several different altar cards in the game. You give that a shuffle and you randomly pick one and also put that in the quest area next to the board somewhere. Then you take the altar dice, give them a roll, and just keep them nearby as well. And this is referred to as the altar pool. And then you refer to the quest setup card. There's some flavor text on the card, and then you read the setup. Now in this case, the setup says, when building the feature deck, shuffle together the altar found card and 2 other feature cards and place them at the bottom of the feature deck. So you always have this feature deck, which basically has all of the different features that you can find in rooms, like the weapons rack here and a treasure chest and a mystical mirror, etc. So you take the altar found card plus 2 other ones. You just randomly take those from the deck. You give those a shuffle and you shuffle this as well. And these need to be placed at the bottom of that deck. So the altar will only be found in the bottom 3 cards of the feature deck, and you keep that feature deck somewhere apart as well. Then it tells you to remove the clue cards from the quest deck, shuffle them together to create a clue deck, and set the deck near the quest area and shuffle the quest deck and flip this card over. So this mission basically has 2 different types of cards. These cards have the clue word on it that this card describes. So I take all of the cards that have clue on them, which is all of these with the banner as well in this case. So I shuffle these cards together and the other cards are basically my quest deck. And every time I open a room, I explore a new room, we draw one quest card, which basically advances the quest and tells you what you find in that room. So all kinds of different things may happen during this quest. So that means you now have a clue deck and a quest deck. Now every quest is different, will have different types of cards and a different setup as well. And after you've done the setup, you flip the card over and it will have the rules for the rest of that quest. Next, all the players collectively choose a threat deck, meaning one of the species of monsters that you will encounter. In this case, we've selected the frogs, and one of the cards of that deck is basically the reference card. You shuffle all the other cards together and you keep them near the miniatures, just somewhere near the board, along with all these colored bases that you can clip onto the figures. And we would just normally grab the tray with all of those figures, and whenever a card comes up, whenever a room is open and a card is drawn, then you would look for that miniature. So this is a Frog's Bogmancer, so that is one of these frogs, and you check the color of the card. In this case it's red. Take one of those bases, just clip that on, and then put it wherever it spawns on the board. And these cards are always placed in a player's threat area. So the player who got this card keeps that card in their threat area. Next, collectively decide which villain you want to fight. So you take that villain's deck of cards. In this case, I picked Bolx the Belch Lord. One of the cards is their villain scheme card, and you place that face up next to the deck. And this deck with all of these events gets shuffled. And at the other side of this card, you'll see the boss itself, which only gets flipped over once the boss actually arrives on the board. So you also have a miniature that you keep nearby. Prepare the remaining card decks. So take all of the search cards, shuffle those together. These are basically cards with items that you can find. Take all of the feature cards and shuffle those together, and these are all the features you can find in rooms, including the altar, except of course for those situations where the quest deck requires you to take some out. So in this case we had the search, which requires you to take the altar found and 2 random other cards and shuffle those and put those on the bottom, but otherwise you just shuffle all of these together and put them next to the board. And then shuffle the lurker deck. And the lurker deck has all kinds of different monsters that can also show up during the game. And it might also have monsters from the faction you're fighting, but there's always just one of each type, and they do not have a color. So these will always be the miniatures without a colored base. That is always the lurker card, but there is all kinds of different monsters in here that you can encounter. Then pick a room on the board where you want to start. Take the stairs tile and put that on the indicated spots on the board, which is always where you will place a feature. And in this case, we'll pick this room. So I'll put the stairs on these 4 spots. And depending on which heroes you've picked, just pick those heroes and put them on the stairs tile. In this case, we're playing all 4 of them, so they just go on the stairs. And finally, take all of the tokens and keep them nearby, ready to use during the game. Now you're ready to play. Let's explain the rules. Now, to play the game, there's quite a few rules, so I'm gonna try and go over them quickly and not in too much detail, otherwise this video would take way too long. So let's start with the board overview. Here's kind of like the setup. So you have the board, you have an area for all the tokens and the miniatures, you have an area for the search deck, the feature card, and the lurker deck. You have your own player area where you keep your cards, and your threat area where your threat cards will be once you draw them. You've got the boss deck, basically the villain. You've got your quest deck area, and you've got your threat cards. And you're playing on, obviously, on the board, which has several rooms on it, and all the rooms have doors indicated by these spaces. Now, a turn is basically played in several phases. You have the hero's turns, the threat turn, the villain turn, and the quest turn. And all of that is explained on your hero turn and those other 3 turns card. This is your reference card, and you keep that next to your hero cards, and that explains what you can do on the hero's turn and then what happens on those 3 other turns explained here. All right, so let's talk about the hero turn. So a hero basically has 3 actions, and you also get 3 action tokens to keep track of that. So every time you've used an action, you simply flip over that token to indicate that you've used an action, and when all 3 of your actions are spent, the next hero can take their turn. And there are different actions you can take. You've got your action card here, so you can either move up to 3 spaces, you can resolve an action on a card that you control, it can be a card on the table, or you can play an action card from your hand that has an action on it. You can also interact with objects. Some cards will have the interact keyword on it. That means you can use that ability on that card for an action. You can also choose to draw a card from your deck. You can rest, which means you discard 1 supply token, which is a common pool of tokens, and you heal 2 damage. Or you can channel, which means you gain a focus token, and you can change an alter die into a result of your choosing. So if that is not a result that you can use or you want, you can choose it to something else that you might be able to use, or perhaps one of the other players can use. And then after a hero has done all of that, there are 3 actions, they flip over their card, and then the next hero can play until all of the heroes have taken their 3 actions and their turns are over, and then every player collectively goes through the threat turn, the villain turn, and the quest turn. And at the end of every hero's turn, they also draw 1 card from the deck. This is something easily forgotten, but do not forget that after you've taken your 3 actions, you get to draw a card. Movement can be done in any direction. You can move orthogonally or diagonally, except for when you move through a door space. So for example, somebody opened a door here, you have to be in the spot next to the door and move into the spot on the other side of the door before you can move on. So you cannot move diagonally through a door in any way. You always have to move from one space to the other exactly next to that door. You can also not interrupt your movement to take another action and then complete your movement. You can move up to 3 spaces and that's it. And when you take another action, then the rest of your movement that you may have not used is lost, except for when you open a door. Open a door is a free action, and that's the only action that can interrupt your movement. The game also uses a range and line of sight. So the distance between 2 elements is simply the number of squares, just like in any other game. You just count the number of squares that are between yourself and another hero. So in this case, this character is removed 3 spaces from this character. And if you're using a card that has a range, you check that number here. It's always this purple symbol here with a number in it. And in this case, Cedrin over there can heal somebody else by exhausting one of these symbols on the altar dice. So you exhaust the card, you re-roll one of these results, and each character within range may heal 1 damage. So the range is 4, so that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So all of these characters are within range, so should they have any damage, he can exhaust this card, which basically means you rotate it, and then you take one of the altar dice that have that symbol on it, and you re-roll that die, and then some different symbol might show up, and then you resolve what the card does. So after all the heroes have taken their turns and done their 3 actions, it's time for the threat turn. And during that turn, first of all, the heroes in any order that you choose will resolve the threats in their threat area. So if during the game you open a room and you all draw a card, so let's say Cedric drew this card, and then maybe in the next room they got this card, which is a Frog's Bogmancer, which is a minion. It's a red one, so you take that minion miniature with the red base clipped on, and then it spawns. For example, if let's say one of these rooms, I'll have to take this away for a bit. So let's say if it was this room that they opened, you know, you could put a door there, maybe he opened it or someone else, and all the players draw a threat card, and Cedric got this one. Then you always spawn them in the shadow zone. That's usually the spot with the hole in the ground. It's a bit hard to see sometimes, but it's here. You spawn them here. And any additional minions that spawn there are spawned just next to it, basically, in any spot you wish. Now, Cedric here, I'll just move these over a bit, has this Bogmancer in his threat area and a event, which is a Frogsling Swarm. That's not an actual miniature. So he has to deal with those in order from left to right. So that means he has to read what the card does, resolve that, and then do this one. Now, since this is a monster, it has a movement and it has a range of attack. And these monsters will always try to move into position to be able to hit an enemy at maximum range. So that means if this Bogmancer is now within 1, 2, 3 range of him, he can actually move away. So this Frogmancer has a range of 6, so they could actually move back quite a bit to stay out of melee range and still be able to cast a spell on them or whatever they do. And then you read what it does, and I'll talk about what that is in a bit. And then after all of these cards have been resolved, the next player does the same until all players have done their threat turn. So then after all of that has been resolved, it's time for the villain turn, which is something that just happens collectively, basically. The threat turn, every hero does that individually, and the villain turn is just one thing. So what happens then, you must resolve all the effects on the cards in the villain play area. So remember, we had an area next to the board for, in this case, Bolx the Belchlord, if you chose that villain. And then there's cards in that area as well, and there will be more cards as you go. And they have some kind of event that happens. And here, for example, it says Toxic Tactics. Each hero must either discard 1 supply or resist the orange check for 5. So that means you check your card, you check the orange icon. Cedrin here has a 2 over there. So that means he either, if he doesn't have any supplies to discard, which are these tokens, and you get those every time you defeat an enemy. But if there aren't enough, and this is a collective pool, so if the group as a whole has enough of these, they can all just discard 1 for each player. But at some point you may have to do a check. So you take your dice and you roll those, and I'll explain how that works in a bit as well. So then you do that, and these cards are also resolved from left to right. And after the cards already on the table have been resolved, then it's time to draw a new one from the villain deck. So you just take a new one and you resolve that one as well. And if you run out of villain cards, the deck is empty and everything has been resolved, then the actual villain spawns, and you flip over this card and you take the miniature and put that on the board as well. Now there are events like these and ongoing events as well. Well, there aren't any in this deck, I looked, but apparently there are also ongoing events that stay on the table and get resolved in every villain phase. And if at some point you actually manage to defeat the villain and all the cards from the villain deck have been resolved and played and they're all gone, then instead you draw cards from the threat deck and just give 1 card to each player as if you would open a room. Now, just like minions, a boss also spawns on the shadow space, so that's the spot with the broken tile, the dark spot basically, and if that spot is taken, you just put it down as close to that area as possible. And you can also have traps in the villain or in the threat decks, and traps are basically indicated by tokens as well. And if you can also have 3D traps if you have the expansions, and then they are placed next to the feature of that room. So if this room, for example, here is the feature space indicated by these white arrows. So feature that is only one spot big, one square big, is placed on the white arrow over here. If it's 2 spaces wide, you place it on the 2 white spots. And if it's 4 spaces big, you place it on all of these 4, including these 2 gray ones like this. And then any traps you will have drawn are placed just adjacent to that, anywhere you want, nearest to the active hero. So in this case, that would probably be here. Finally, after the villain's turn, there's the quest turn, and then you simply check the cards in the quest area, which is also a spot next to the board. And it works just like resolving any other card. You just read the card, do as it says, maybe you need to do some checks. And after all of those cards have been resolved, all the players can flip over their reference cards again and choose who takes their turn next. Now let's talk about how to reveal a room. So every time a hero takes the free action to open a door, they have to be on the spot next to that door space. So here, in this case, Myrene will open this door. So you can place an open door miniature on the board. So what you do first is you draw a feature card from the feature deck. So you draw that card and you take a look at that. That is the alchemy desk. So you take that corresponding miniature and you place it in that space. So in this case, it's a miniature that takes up 2 spaces. So I put it in the space with the 2 white arrows like so. Next, you draw a quest card. So in this case, the search quest had 2 decks, one with clues and one with quest cards, which are hard to tell apart, sadly. I wish they had printed something on the back to tell them apart in this case, because all the quest decks are different anyway. So, but this is the part with the quest cards. So you take that card and you read what it does. So there's a bit of flavor text here which you can read, and then it says, when revealed, attach this card to this room's feature card. And then each hero may place 1 search token on this room's feature card to draw 1 search card. So if you have search tokens, you can do that, and otherwise you just place this underneath where the dotted line is. So you put that underneath, and that is now connected to this card. And this card may be removed separately in some instances, and otherwise it will stay there until this card is removed for some reason. Sometimes that can happen, but in this case it will just stay in the quest area. And it tells you that when you activate this, aside from the things that the feature itself does, you can also use this to activate it. And a hero adjacent to the attached feature may draw a card from the clue deck. So in this case, because this is a card from that search deck, that's why they have a separate deck of clue cards. You can draw, so if she were here, then she'd be adjacent, and then they can draw a clue from the clue deck. And this is basically what advances you through the quest, and then you do what it says. So yeah, that's the second step that you do. And then every hero must draw and resolve 1 threat card from the threat deck. So let's just take one here for Myrene. And so this is a muckslinger, a Frox muckslinger with the red border. So you just take a miniature from the miniature pool, put a red base ring on it, and it will spawn in the shadow area, which is over here, the tile with the hole in it basically. So you can spawn it over there, and Myrene will now have control of that card and that miniature, even though that miniature may sometimes attack another hero, or other heroes may attack that miniature. That player that controls Myrene will also control that enemy. So now let's say that the second player also draws a card from the threat deck, and this time it's a trap. It's Muckstakes, the blue trap. So another player has that card. you simply take the blue trap token and then place it adjacent to that room's feature closest to the nearest hero. So I could, for example, put it here. Now, a room can only be revealed during a hero's action phase, and each hero can only reveal one room. And if enough rooms have been opened that you run out of feature cards, then you can no longer open any doors. All right, now let's take a closer look at those attributes on the hero cards. So you'll notice there's 6 icons here. Aside from these other icons, the purple one is the range of whatever that hero can do. The blue icon here with the shield shape is their defense. So Cedrin here has a natural defense of 1, and that means if he takes a number of damage, he can subtract 1 from that damage. And the 12 here is, of course, their total hit points. So the first icon there in the red with the number 2 is their might. So that's his physical strength. The orange one is the fortitude, so his resilience or toughness. The green one is his agility, so dexterity, agility, whatever you want to call it. The blue one is their willpower, so their mental fortitude. The pink one there with the 2 is the charisma, so your personality. And this yellowish half moon there with the 2, that's your intellect. And these values are, of course, different per hero, and they are used for doing all kinds of tests. So on all of these different cards you will often find a test. So let's see here, the alchemy desk here, for example, has an interact with a range of 1. So here the range is just in brackets there. And it says search. So for each supply gained during this test, choose a character in this room to heal 1 damage. So next to the alchemy desk, you can kind of try to make like a healing potion or something, trying to heal your comrades. Now, this search action does not have a number next to it, so that means any success you roll is a success. Other cards like these muck stakes here, so that trap that we put down there, might have a trigger which says inflict, and the orange test with a number 4 in a round circle there. Here's a task test which has no number, and here is a resist test which has the number 3. So that means the number of successes you need to roll to succeed. Now in this case there's no number, so you basically just look at Cedrin's corresponding icon there. So that's the intelligence, that's 2, so he takes 2 dice, you roll those, there you go. So this is a success, this burst is a success. Here's another success, and he also gains a focus token. Now the way that works is you either just get a token, and you can choose, even if you have tokens, you can choose to take another token from this, or if you already had some of those tokens, you can spend one, just discard it back to the pool, to turn that focus on the die into another success. So he could have, with another focus token, he could have 3 successes now, or he could just gain a focus token and have 2 successes. So that means for each supply gained during this test, choose a character in this room to heal 1 damage. So I guess that means that Cedric gains 2 supply during that test, puts that in the common pool, and can heal 2 heroes in the room. But there aren't any, and I'm playing with Cedrin while the other one is here, so forgive me for that, but that's basically what you do. But there aren't any others in the room, so he can't heal anyone other but himself. There's a third value on the dice that you can roll, and that is the critical hit, which is this burst. And whenever you roll that, you can take another die and roll that. And this also counts as a success, but you get to roll an additional die. So you could do that and then get another success, for example. Or if you roll another one of those, then that's another success, and you get to roll another one. So those are exploding dice. And you can roll just as long as there are no more critical successes rolled. There are several kinds of tests that you can take, such as this one for searching, but you also has a general test attribute, such as, for example, this Froxling Swarm card will have a test of 3 with the green icon, meaning in his case that's just 1 die. I believe that was the strength. So you test that. But you can also have attack tests like here. This has an action and the attack keyword with the red icon, which is in Cedrin's case a 2. So he gets to roll 2 dice, and any success, because there's no number behind it, is a hit. There are inflict tests as well. You can also have resist tests like this one over here. We already saw the search test, and there's also a task test right here. Now with the attack tests, it's pretty obvious. You attack an enemy, and if you roll more successes than the number that's next to that test, you deal damage to an enemy, and then you check that enemy's card to see if they have any resistance, any shield icons on the card. So for example, this guy here is the red muckslinger, has a shield icon with a 1 in it. So that means if I rolled 2 successes, then I'd have 1 success cancelled and the other one would deal damage. Enemies and heroes can also gain and lose these shield tokens. So if those are added to their cards, they have, of course, additional defense against an attack. But every time you deal damage over their natural resistance, then any additional damage simply discards these tokens, and then any damage that's left after that actually deals them damage. And for each of that damage, you can place a damage token on their card. And the same, of course, goes for the heroes. Now, the inflict trigger word is basically the same, only that it's basically the enemies or the traps attacking you, attacking the heroes. So it works the same way. You do a test, and any successes you roll reduces that amount of damage, and any damage left simply gets dealt to you. So then you also take damage tokens and put them on your card. Resist, same thing, simply roll the tests, and any values left, so this has a resist of 3. If you manage to roll 3 or more, you don't take any damage, but if you roll less, you take the difference in damage. I've already covered searching, and the task keyword allows your character to place progress tokens on the task's card. Now, normally a card with a task will have a number as well, and then every success that you roll that exceeds the possible number that's next to the test, you get tokens that you place on it, and when the number of tokens exceeds the number on the card, then you have fulfilled that task. Now this has task with no number, so basically if you fulfill that task and you get a success, you basically disable this trap. And just like with defeating an enemy, if you manage to do enough damage to defeat an enemy, that enemy is removed and you get a supply token. And with traps, it's the same. If you manage to complete that task and disable the trap, the card is removed from your threat area and the token is removed from the board, and you also get a supply in the common pool. Now you can play this game with allies as well, which means basically you're controlling a hero as a non-player character, as an ally. And whenever an ally takes equal or more damage than what is listed on their card, they are removed from the game and you just have to continue alone. But when you're all playing with people at the table and you're playing cooperatively and one of the heroes is also defeated, then the game ends and you collectively lose. But you win the game if you manage to complete the entirety of the quest by doing all of those cards and getting the required thing you need to do. And yeah, that's basically it. So when you do that, then you in this case, you know, the rules say if there are 1 per player, 1p is basically 1 per player, quest tokens on this card, each hero, and each hero is on the stairs tile, so that's the tile where you entered the game, then in this case you found the artifact that you were searching for and you win the game. But that is of course different for each quest, so it's very important to read what the quest tells you to do and to remember that and try to fulfill those conditions and win the game. So when do lurkers spawn? There's also a lurker deck which has different types of enemies from all kinds of species that you can get aside from the main quest's threat. So in this case the frogs. So basically, if you run out of cards from the threat deck and all of these cards are in play, defeated cards, actually, they get put in a discard pile. Now, the way I understand it from the rules, I couldn't really find it, but if this deck is empty and everybody has lots of cards in their threat area, which is not a situation you want to be in, but at some point you'll have defeated enemies and there will be lots of cards in the discard pile. I think that when you need to draw a new card and there aren't any, you just shuffle the discard pile and you put that back and you draw that. But the rules also say whenever you can't draw a card from the threat deck and there are no cards in the discard pile, which led me to believe that you shuffle them back, then you draw a lurker card, which is basically a worse kind of threat. And then that player takes that card in their threat area and you basically get a new monster. And then lastly, there's a deck of search card, and you will typically draw search cards when resolving search tests. And many of these cards will have some kind of item that you can use. It's consumable, and you use it once and then it's gone. And you can recognize those because they have the use keyword on them, and most of these cards do have that use keyword, but some of them, this even has an exhaust, so you can keep this and exhaust it, tap the card and in this case move up to 2 spaces until you actually use it and the card is discarded. And some cards will have an event like this one, a discarded pack, and you just resolve that and then discard the card. And also during a Hero's Act phase, you can also give one or more of your search cards that you've gained, that you have control over, to another hero in an adjacent space. Yeah, and like I said, with the threat deck, it is indeed the case that when a deck of cards runs out, you have a discard pile, you shuffle the discard pile, and you create a new deck, except for the villain deck, because when that runs out, the villain spawns. And if you defeat the villain, then that's gone. The quest deck, of course, because you need to complete that, and the feature deck, because like I said, when all the features are on the board, you've basically explored the maximum number of rooms that you can explore, and then no more doors will open because there are simply no more features left to put on the board. Then finally, the rulebook also has a segment of campaign rules when you play the game in campaign mode. And that will work slightly differently, and you will have items that you will keep and take to the next quest. And your heroes will also have these yellow bordered upgrade cards, which basically replace basic cards in your decks and makes them stronger. But I will leave those campaign rules for you to discover on your own. So that is in a nutshell how you play Altar Quest. You basically have a quest deck, you pick a different one every time you play. You can pick your threat deck, so the monsters you face, you can pick your villain, you can pick your heroes, you can pick the room that you start in, and then you just go and explore, and every time you open a room you spawn the things in that room, so one of those items that are in the room and the threats that are in the room that you divide amongst the players. And that's how you continue until you've finished the quest. So that is basically it. All right, so let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Altar Quest by Blacklist Games. Now I have a lot of things to say about this game, but I will try and keep it as short as possible. Let me start with the components as always. So the components for this game are top-notch. They look really, really good. The board is really big and really nicely colored. The art on it is fantastic. The art on the cards and in the rule book and everything is nice. It's a certain style. It is has a realism, like a realistic style, but it also has a little bit of anime kind of vibes, in my opinion. And kind of wants to be 3D but isn't quite there. So I don't know, the art feels a little bit of a mixed bag, but all in all it does look good. It's very colorful and it's clear what everything is supposed to be on the cards, what's happening. But I mostly like the board quite a lot. The miniatures are great. You have these cool 3D doors with you know, an open door that you can put on the board whenever you actually open a door. And they have fixed spaces on the board as well. So the board will always be the same. But yeah, that's just how this game is designed. You have all of these tokens with all the icons on them, which is clear. You have the action tokens that you can flip around, which is helpful. You have the trap tokens. You have lots and lots and lots of tokens. But the quality of all of that and all of the miniatures is really good. If you check my unboxing videos of Altar Quest and the expansions, you can take a closer look at those. But I think those are great, and also the dice are really nice. The Altar dice are a marbled black and look really nice with the white icons, and the action dice have a transparent light blue turquoise color, also with white faces on it, and they are very nice, very clear. They are rounded, so they roll really well. So all of that is good, and the cards are also of a very good quality. They are thick enough, not the thickest kind I've ever seen, but they are certainly not too thin. And like I said, with clear artwork on them, and the text is also pretty good and easy to read. So then the artwork, again, like I said, I already touched on that, looks really nice. Yeah, I mean, also there's a plenty of artwork also on the cards. Every card has some artwork, so there has been a lot of attention put into that and a lot of work. So that looks good as well. Some of the tokens have some very simple illustrations on them, just, you know, an icon or a symbol. Others have a nice illustration. Actually, these tokens with the backpacks look nice. The NPC tokens look nice. And then you have these damage, which are again very simple. So it's also, that is a little bit of a mixed bag. The theme is good. It is, of course, the generic fantasy theme that we've seen a lot in dungeon crawlers, but I do like that they did try and make it original. They have these unique heroes. You have, of course, the cleric, which is pretty standard, and you have a thief, halfling, which is also something that you see a lot, but you also have the warrior. In this case is a female vampire, so that's pretty cool. She's a vampire wanting to do good, and that's pretty cool. And she has these vampiric skills that she can use, like, you know, sucking the blood from an enemy to drain it of health and gaining some health back. And one of them, the kind of like a sorceress, is a harpy. So it's a woman with bird feet and claws, and that's pretty cool. That's pretty unique. And also the enemies are different than the usual tropes. There's not like goblins and orcs, but you have these frogmen, the frogs, and you have pigmen, and you have, you know, different kinds of enemies, and also bosses. The bosses are pretty cool. You have this big Bulks the Belch Lord, this frog's boss. So I think, you know, there's also gargoyles, which is again pretty standard, but I think they made a fun and nice mixed bag of enemies to just change it up a bit, and heroes as well. So in that regard, the theme does get a thumbs up for me. So now the gameplay. Now this is where I have some good things to say and some bad things to say. So let's start with the setup. Now setup is actually pretty simple. You just put the board on the table, you pick your hero and its cards. You have a deck of cards. You take some of the cards out and you shuffle the rest, and you draw 4 or 5 cards, and that's it, you're ready to go. And you put your staircase on one of the rooms. You can pick whichever room you want, put it in there, put the heroes there, and you're basically ready to start. All you need now is to pick your quest. There are several quests in here that you can choose from. It's just a deck of cards. You have your hero of your monsters. So you pick one of the monster factions, one of the species that you want to fight, and you pick one of the bosses. You can mix those up. You don't need to per se have the Bulks, the Belch Lord frog boss with the frogs. You can also mix that up if you want to. But you need to keep track of all of those, so you need to have room. But anyway, for the setup, it's not that much work. But, you know, it's not really fast either. You do need to get all of those cards and shuffle those. So setup isn't the fastest, but it's not the worst either. So it's kind of in between. So I'm pretty neutral on that one. Same with putting it all away. And as you can see, there are a lot of tokens. So I just grabbed a whole lot of Ziploc bags and put them all in. And there's just an enormous amount of baggies that you need to open and put all those tokens on the table. And there's no decent insert for that in the game. So that's one of basically, again, something that goes back to the components that I should have mentioned, is that the game only has this tray for the cards, which is just a simple plastic tray, and a slot here for your dice. And you can put some tokens in there, but certainly not all of them. And of course, the miniatures do have some nice trays. So these plastic trays are perfect for the minis. They fit in really nicely and they keep them safe. They have a lid, so that's great. But the two miniature trays and this card tray basically fill the box with the board on top. So you don't really have room for all of these tokens once you've punched them from the punch board. So I kind of ended up just putting them underneath those miniature trays, trying to fit it all in. But, you know, setting up the game with all those baggies, that is a bit of a hassle. So there's that. It would have greatly benefited from a good insert that had separate little trays for all of those different tokens that you could just take out of the box, put on the table, and you're ready to go. So there's that. Now, a turn in the game, you have 3 actions. So during your turn, it's all on your hero card here, so I'll just take that for reference. So you've basically got 3 actions you can take, and you have 3 of these action tokens, which help you to keep track of what you did, and you flip them around to the dark side of that token, indicating that you've used an action. So you have those 3 in front of you, you've got your cards, and on the cards you can read whatever you can do. Now, before I continue talking about that, sometimes it's unclear when something is an action or not. So basically all of the things described on this card, those are the actions. But cards sometimes have things on them that are free. You have feat cards that you can play for free. You can exhaust a card, which basically means you tap it and do what it says, which is also free. You can open a door, which is also free. But you need to remember all of that. There are certain situations, certain cards that have text on them, and we were wondering when we were playing this game, so is this an action or is this a free action? And it's not really clear, so you have to take the rule book and look it up and hope that you can find something in it. And the rule book is a whole thing I want to talk about, so I'll highlight that in a bit, but it's not very well written and it lacks an index, but more on that later. So then, after all the heroes have played, you have your own threat cards, which I like. This is a fun mechanism. And you don't need a DM in this game, which is great. And there's not one player who needs to resolve all of those monsters. No, every player has their own threat area with those monster cards and those threat cards. And they resolve them in any order. So you can start with the player on your left. They resolve all of their threat cards, then the player on your right, and then you, or in any order you want. Or if you're playing solo, you know, all of your heroes will have their own threat area with their threat cards. Resolve them in any hero order, but that hero resolves their threat cards from left to right. And that is a good system. I like that. It means everybody is doing something to, you know, to control all of those enemies or traps. And I like that. So you're not sitting there waiting until the AI has had its turn. You all play a part in that. And I do love that. So then it's the villain's turn. And then the villain cards that are also in the villain area, in the quest area, get triggered. You just read what's on the card and you do that. And that's usually over pretty quick. Same with the quest turn. After the villain has done its thing, the quest turn happens and you have some activate keywords on those cards as well that you resolve. And then you're back to the players. That is quite a lot to take in. So this card, this reference card, is really, really necessary because I kept forgetting the order in which to do things. So it is really necessary to keep this here on your area and say, okay, now we're doing the threat turn, now we're doing the villain turn, now we're doing the quest turn. So that helps. So that is basically what a turn is. Then combat. Often you will be in combat because there's all these monsters. This is also fun. It's resolved with the combat dice, and basically you check on your hero cards and your actions that you can take to fight, what kind of action you're taking. And that can be any kind of attack, it can be a spell, whatever your hero is good at and whatever you have on your hand or in front of you, and you resolve those using your actions. And it will often tell you to, let me see if I can grab one of those hero cards. So you have these attributes on your hero card. So here they are. So I have a whole deck of cards. So you have 2 cards that are basically your standard attacks or whatever, your feats, things that you can do that you always have next to your hero card. And they are indicated by a belt. Basically, there's a kind of like a belt on there. And you have those on your table in front of you. And this one, for example, has a basic attack action that you can use for an action. But they have these attributes, which are 6 symbols in 6 different colors with different icons on them. So even for the colorblind, this will be easy to recognize. And they have numbers 1, 2, or 3. This means you roll 1, 2, or 3 of these dice to resolve that combat or that action that you're taking. And I really like that. That is a lot of fun because these dice, they either have a success, a hit, or a focus, which gives you either a focus token, or if you already have focus tokens, you can spend one to turn that focus result into a success. So that's great. You never really miss. You either get something, focus tokens, or you can spend those. You just put that little bit of extra effort to make that into a hit. But you also have the critical hit, which is basically exploding dice. Because you roll this, that's a hit, but you get to roll an additional die. So you pick one other die, you roll that. If that's a critical hit, that's a hit, and you roll another die. And so even with 1, 2, or 3 dice, you can get more hits than the number of dice. And that's a lot of fun. There's even one side that has both a focus and a hit. So that's just a lot of fun. I really like that. And it's pretty unique also with these tests. And you don't only use them in combat, you also use them when performing certain other tests. So that is a really cool mechanism. And of course, the enemies just do what it says on their card. They don't need to roll for anything. They just deal damage if they can see you, if they can hit you, and otherwise they move towards you. And that's all very well done. I think that's an elegant system. So I've already touched on tests, same idea, same system, really like that as well. Then you have the altar dice. So these are rolled at the start of the game, so 5 dice with all these different symbols on them, 6 different symbols. And they basically do nothing unless there's something on one of the threat cards that tell you, hey, during the threat turn or during the quest turn, if there's this symbol, then this happens. So sometimes you want to prevent those symbols. It's usually a bad thing. You want to prevent that symbol from being there at the end of everyone's turn. And you can do that by, during your turn, if you can use that symbol for one of your cards. So for example, this card has exhaust. That means I need to tap it. And it has a flame symbol on it. Deal 1 damage to an enemy within range. So if I have that symbol on the table, I can take that die, roll it, and see what else comes up, and then do that action, and then exhaust that card. So that's a really fun system as well. So these dice give you the possibility to do something more on your turn. And if that doesn't work for you, you can always channel, and you gain a focus token, and you can change one of these dice to a result of your choice. And if that's your first action, you can still use the second action to use that die right away. As long as you make sure, or at least try to collectively make sure that none of the bad icons are on the table when there's one of those cards in play that does a bad thing. So the alter dice is a really cool system, and the attack and test dice are also very, very cool. I really like that. Now, opening doors, like I said, is a free action, and whenever you open a door, you do the same thing. You basically explore the room. So what you do is you get one feature card, like I said. So it's one of those 3D furniture items. You get the card from that, and you draw, every character draws a threat card, which is usually a monster. You get that in your own threat area. But thing is, it's basically always the same. What you're doing in this game is going through all of those rooms, as many as you can, to progress your quests. You get monsters, you fight those monsters, or you run away from them. Sometimes it's better to run away than to engage every single monster, because you're on a timer, basically. At some point, the boss will show up, and that's going to make your life a whole lot more difficult, which is also cool. I like that mechanism. But every time you open a door, there's going to be one of these, and there's only so many of these. And there's not going to be multiple in one room, even though I have two of these here on the board, but that's just one room. It's always going to be one of those. So at some point you're going to open a room and say, well, which one of all of these 3D furnitures is it going to be this time? And you already know what they do because you've seen them all at some point. And it's not really a surprise anymore. You know, is it going to be the mushrooms? Is it going to be the alchemist's bench? Is it going to be the bookcase? Is it going to be the weapons rag or the mirror? And some monsters and a quest card. So it gets repetitive, in my opinion. So that's a little bit, that mechanism, I really preferred like classic hero quests, where the quest itself is described in a quest mission book, and different rooms have different of these features, and you can search them and the quest will tell you what they do. So this bookcase could be something different in every game you play. Not in Alter Quest. In Alter Quest, the bookcase is always the bookcase, always does the same thing. And there's only one per room. It feels like that could have been done better, in my opinion. It feels a bit lacking. So let's talk about the rulebook then for a second, or a minute. Because I've read the rulebook, of course, and I went through it and I thought, oh, it looks pretty well written. It looks nice. Everything is laid out nicely. You know, you have your cards with all these arrows explaining what's on the cards. You have these blocks of text that kind of tell you something important. You know, the setup is explained here, but it does have all of these areas that aren't really printed anywhere. You just need to put them on a table and keep track. But it has these nice, you know, big blocks of text that explain something particular, something special. But there are a lot of keywords in here. The rulebook tries to explain exactly what counts as an action and doesn't really do a good job explaining what doesn't count as an action, what's a free action. And sometimes paragraphs are written in a way that during the game you'll look something up and you can interpret it in different ways. There's discussion. I actually had several discussions during several games where we were unsure on a certain card, how it would resolve, and a certain rule, and we had to look it up. And since it has no index, there's no index in the game with keywords, so you have to go through every single page trying to find that passage that you read earlier that has that thing explained that you're looking for, and you might easily miss it. And you're thinking, wasn't it on the left side of a page somewhere? I remember reading it, or was it in one of these boxes? And then you read it and you're like, okay, so this is what it says. You read it out loud and you're thinking, so I think we need to do this and this. And it's already bad enough that you have to say, I think. It has to be clear. But then the person next to you says, can I read it? Yeah, sure. See if you think the same. And they read it and they say something else. And that is very frustrating. That is just not good. It should have been written a lot better. There are passages here that are just not clear. And I mean, I feel like everything Well, almost everything is in here, but sometimes I just have questions and I just cannot find it. Yeah, I know, and I have to reread the entire rule book to maybe, hopefully, find out that I missed it somewhere. And so I feel there's a big minus that it does not have an index, clear keywords, clearly explains what is not an action, what you can do for free, because there's also cards that have like, like this exhaust, that have an action and then a horizontal line and then an exhaust. And we kept thinking, so can I use this bottom part for free for exhausting the card? Is that an action? Or can I only use that if I use the top part? Do I need to activate this card with an action before I can use the bottom part? I still don't know. I mean, during the game, we looked it up and we probably found out, but I've already forgotten it because it's just not intuitive. So that's another minus. A lot of the things, a lot of the mechanisms in this game are not intuitive, and you need to look them up over and over. No index, you're going through the pages of the book, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of discussion and a lot of frustration. So that's a big minus for me personally. So then finally we have, or almost finally, we have the replayability. So how replayable is this game? Well, like I said, basically, this can be played as one-offs. There is a campaign, there is the Out of Luxon storybook here, which is the campaign, and that's a nice, relatively thick book, and it tells you, how to set up a quest, different chapters, but yeah, it doesn't feel as exciting as I hoped it would be, because you're still on that same board, doing the same thing, opening the rooms, setting up one feature, drawing one card. It's the same thing as you're always doing. So as I would suggest trying to play the story, because at least then you have a feeling that you're doing something new every time you play. Because when you're playing as a one-off, you're literally doing the same thing every time you play. And normally that doesn't have to be a bad thing. There are thousands of games where you're doing the same thing every time, but mostly those are competitive games. If you have a game, something simple like chess or Santorini or Azul or Dominion, you're always playing the same game, but you're playing competitively, so it's a battle of wits. It's who is playing this game the best and who is going to win. This is a cooperative game. This is a dungeon crawler, so the game needs to give the players a new experience, a story, something exciting, something new every time you play. And maybe the campaign does that a little, but the one-off games that you play are just feel very repetitive, because like I said, it's always going to be one of those features and they always do the same, and you're always doing the same thing when you open a door. So in my opinion, that gets old really fast, and add to that the frustration with the rules and the looking up, a game can also drag on for a very long time. So sometimes we've been playing like 3 or 4 hours on the same quests and we hadn't even finished it and we got tired of it. The first game just wasn't fun and we packed it up and we said, let's try it again next week. Read the rules again, tried to remember everything, set up the game again, played another quest, tried a little bit different this time, different enemies, and we find we were basically doing the same thing again, even though it was a different quest. And so after like 3.5 hours, we weren't even finished. So we took pictures, we packed it all up. A week after, we put it all back again, which of course made the setup even longer. But we put it all back the way it was and we continued playing. So in the end, it took us about 6 hours to play one full quest, which we won, and we barely won. So it did feel like it was balanced nicely because it was a close call. And so that's something the game has got going for it, that it's a challenging game. And it does challenge you to really cooperate and really try to optimize your turns, because this game does not give you any slack. You need to get that quest done or you will lose. So that's a good thing. But not if it's the same thing every time. I want different winning conditions. I want different maps. I want different things to happen. So that was the second game that took us 2 whole nights. And then, of course, afterwards it does go faster, but you really need to remember all of these rules. And it's not intuitive enough that that happens easily. So you kind of need a really dedicated group of people, and at least one person who's so passionate about the game that they just remember the rule book from front to back and can always explain or give answers to any questions that might arise during the gameplay. And I'm sorry, I'm not that person. So this was not the most fun experience. And first impressions of a game are very important, I think. So this game did not give me a very good first impression. Now, I will say this, that the game does have potential, but there's just too much lacking and too much unclear, and all those tokens and a lot of bookkeeping that you need to keep track of with all the cards around the board, with the threat area and the quest cards and the monster cards, the villain cards, I mean, and that's just a lot of things to keep track of that make it difficult and slow it down. So it's a bit 50-50 in that regard. And then finally, of course, language dependency is also a factor, because the game is obviously very much language dependent. Now, a lot of dungeon crawlers and cooperative games are, so it's not a surprise. So I'm not going to give it any negative points for that, but it is something you need to keep in the back of your mind, because there's a lot of reading to do. So, in conclusion, in the end, if you're a huge fan of the system with, taking the cards and mashing them together and creating your quests and just playing that, or you're really keen on playing the campaign, then this game might be for you. If you don't mind going through the rules and really trying to remember that, really investing in this game, then it might be a game for you. But if you're the kind of player like me who likes to just pull the game off of their shelf, play that tonight, and the next time we play something else, it's not for you, because you're going to forget rules. You're going to have to look up a lot of rules, and the rule book is just not good for looking up things. And there's going to be questions. It's not very intuitive. All the things I said that are negative kind of just drag it down. And that really saddens me, because I was looking forward to this game and I really wanted it to be fun. And I think if they made a revised version of this, a 2.0 version with a better rulebook, some cards need, to be written better, keywords, that it is clear what is an action and what is free during your turn, then it has a really good shot, because the potential is there. And if the Sadler brothers do intend on revisiting this game and give it a lot of love, I think this game needs to have a lot more love, then it has good potential, and I will certainly try it again. But as it is right now, I'd rather just shelve it and see what happens and maybe end up selling it in the end. So those are my thoughts on Altar Quest. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get a notification whenever I upload a new video. Please also consider becoming a Patreon saint to my channel, which helps me keep making videos. It's very much appreciated. You'll get access to my Patreon exclusive videos on my page. Link is in the description below. You can also click the Patreon icon at the end of this video, and you'll also get your name in the credits of all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.